Awesome. We're going to go ahead and get started this afternoon. We are delighted to have the audience. I just told Mr. Danneker we're going to have him for every history for lunch because look at the crowd that we have today. So it's great to see so many people out and enjoying this talk with us today. Before we get started, I would like to go ahead and tell you about the upcoming History for Lunch we will have on April the 3rd. It will be Frank Stick's Flat Tops, A Vision for the Outer Banks. The staff of the Outer Banks History Center will present a history of Frank Stick's flat top cottages of Southern Shores that grew from his vision of a thriving beach community in a remote landscape of the early 20th century. So you can come in and they'll be talking about all the flat top houses that have been discovered on the Outer Banks, and that will be presented by the Outer Banks History Center. Today, we would like to welcome Mr. Scott Danneker. He's certified as a commercial air pilot in the United States, Great Britain, Japan, and Germany. He's a test pilot with Westinghouse Airships, chief test pilot Zeppelin Company, Germany, FAA flight instructor and designated airship pilot examiner, USA, LBA flight instructor and airship examiner, Germany, ground instructor, TCOM, American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, LTA Lifetime Achievement Award, and a 40-year resident of Elizabeth City, North Carolina. And I'm probably getting ready to tell you how old I am today because I actually babysat for the Mr. and Mrs. Danneker's children when they were much younger. And my one experience of them was they had Disney movies, and the Disney movies were in another a foreign language. They were not in the American English language. So that is the one thing that I remember about the Dannekers when I babysat. So, and they actually lived on Main Street at the time. But anyway, Mr. Danneker, I'd like to go ahead and turn this over to you today.
Thank you, Lori. And thanks for coming. This should be great. Is microphone okay, Ron? Excellent, excellent, excellent. Okay. See if we can't get through this. Am I hitting the right button? It won't go.
After all this testing.
After all this testing.
Okay, hold on. Let's do this. Stop. And share.
This is great. It's not my fault.
There we go.
Hello, everybody. My name is Scott. You've already gotten the introduction, so I'm not going to go any further. We're going to be talking about airships today. And many of you have heard about the exploits of the airships back during the Second World War. Steve Chalker, who's right here in the front, he's the base historian down at Weeksville. If you have any questions about that period and beyond, ask Steve. So apologies if I'm treading on some of your territory today. But today, instead of starting at the beginning of the Second World War, we're going to start at the end. Okay, war ended in 1945, and you would think maybe that the Blimps would have gone after that period of time, but they didn't. In fact, in 1946, they changed the focus of the base from airships to storing airplanes. So they built a couple of runways out there and started flying in all of these airplanes. In fact, there were so many airplanes stored at the hangars here at Weeksville that there was no room left for the airships. They had to fly them out to New Jersey. And this, if you read the Pasquotank County Register, was the point in history of the base where civilian employment was actually at its highest. Cold War moving along. They did bring the airships back around 1947. Lori, there's some extra stuff up here on the screen, and I'm not getting. This is a good picture to pause on. See, I'm getting this up here, and it's kind of like blocking some of the stuff out. There we go. And okay, so they do bring the blimps back in 1947, and they hang around pretty much doing the same thing as they were before up until 1957. The main role being defensive anti-submarine work. Okay. Let's see where we go from here. Now it doesn't work again. It's not my fault. Lori? That wasn't me. That was somebody else. Okay. We're just going to go with it, okay? Now, also during that period of time, 1947 to 1957, there was a lot of stuff going on. They brought in some new blimps. They even brought in some helicopters, and everything was going great. But around May 6th, there were some rumors spreading around town. Some rumors about, well, maybe they're going to close this base down. So Daily Advance, being right on top of things as they always are, they get on to our local congressman here in District 1, fellow by the name of Herbert C. Bonner. You've heard of this guy before. He's got a bridge named for him down over Oregon Inlet. Daily Advance calls him up and says, hey, what's going on here? And he said, oh, don't worry about it. These are all just rumors. I've checked with my buddies at the Armed Services Committee in the House, Bureau of Aeronautics. There's no question. Your base is safe. And if there is ever any problem, it looks like they might be closing it, we'll give you plenty of notice about that. About 2 or 3 weeks later, this is the headline on the Daily Advance: Blimp squadrons ordered closed. Whoa, this came out of nowhere. The congressman was even caught off guard with this. What happens? The base is going to be closed, and what's it going to do? It's going to hit the local economy in $1957 to the tune of $3 million a year, just in payrolls. Using today's numbers, basically $33 million a year hit in the local economy just in payrolls from the closing of the base. Nobody could do anything about it. Why? The decision to close the base was made inside the Navy itself. There was no congressman or no senator, nobody on the upper levels involved in it. The decision to get rid of the airships was made strictly within the Pentagon by lower level officers. Why? Because they wanted aircraft carriers. The role of the United States Navy was changing from a defensive coastal anti-submarine type of a role to a much broader outlook. We're going to project American power and foreign policy across the four corners of the globe: South China Sea, Mediterranean, Suez Canal, Straits of Hormuz, you name it. This is where we're going to be projecting our power. And if any kind of an enemy can get up to the coast of North Carolina, then somebody's been asleep at the wheel. Airships are gone because they do not fit into this role that the Navy now has for their future. So what happens here in Elizabeth City? Well, they put the base on a kind of like a maintenance caretaking status. They still own it, but there's only a couple of people down here sweeping the floors, quite literally. I was going to do something on this. I urge you to look it up. During that period of time when the Navy was still in charge of the base down here, there was something called Project Echo. I was going to put something in it, just don't have the time, so we're going to breeze through with it on one slide. I urge you to look this up because it involves local history. Everybody's reading about Project Zebra now, and we're training the Russians to fly flying boats out of here. Everybody's fascinated with it. Read Project Echo. Very primitive communication satellite project. What they discovered accidentally as a result of this project, and that balloon that's in hangar or Dock 1 at the base right now, what they discovered, it makes voyages of Captain James T. Kirk and Science Officer Spock seem like they were just kind of like errant jaywalkers. Amazing stuff. Project Echo. Look it up. Let's move on. Okay, what happens to the base? Well, the Navy holds on to it until about 1964. The base gets sold to the state of North Carolina. State of North Carolina tries to turn it into an industrial park. There's no biters on that. And so what do? The state turns around and sells it to the Westinghouse Electric Corporation. Westinghouse and they buy the whole thing, all 822 acres of what is now New Begun land. They buy it all. So Westinghouse turns around almost immediately, sells the big steel hangar that's still out there to a company called Triangle Pacific. That's one of their subsidiaries. They build kitchen cabinets. Anybody remember kitchen cabinets out at the Blimp base? Yeah, okay, fine. Westinghouse sells the remainder of the land to the GE Small and Sons Company, and from that you find what is today New Begun land. Am I doing okay? All right, am I not talking too fast or anything? All right, great. All right, in 1971, Westinghouse forms TCOM. It is a subsidiary for building tethered, unpowered communications systems, or unpowered balloons. So here comes a question a lot of people ask, or a lot of times I hear, some people call it blimps, some people call it an airship, some people call it an aerostat. Well, what is it? Well, you're all going to be experts within the next 60 seconds, I guarantee it. Okay, airship or aerostat. An aerostat obtains its lift by using buoyancy. When I came in here, I had a big, huge bouquet of balloons from Patty Bergman's birthday party the other day. I was saying, this is an aerostat. You see, it goes up and down. It's held up by just the air around it. And Lori sees me coming in. She says, get that balloon out of here. The last time we had one, it went up and it set off the sprinkler system, and we had to bring the fire department in. So there's no balloons. There's no balloons. But you know what an aerostat is, okay? It's a balloon obtaining the lift from buoyancy. Now that is opposed to an aerodyne, all right? And what is an aerodyne? Well, it obtains its lift from moving through the air. Just like those balloons were aerostats, this, there you go, Bill, is an aerodyne. That's as much of an aerodyne as a Boeing 747, okay? Are we clear on that? All right, next slide. What is an airship? An airship is a type of aerostat that can navigate through the air because it's got motors on it, all right? It's a type of aerostat. So you can use the old analogy, well, all squares are rectangles, but all rectangles are not squares. All dogs are animals, but not all animals are dogs. All airships are aerostats, but all aerostats are not airships. Are we okay with this so far? Everybody all right? I'm going to give you a little test in a second. Is this an aerostat or an airship? Aerostat. It's tied to the ground. It doesn't have any motors on it. Great. Another thing you can tell is that take a look at the fins are big and inflatable. That's another thing you won't see on an airship. Aerostat. You're right. Okay, what's this? Is this an airship or an aerostat? It's an airship. It's got motors on it, right? And it's not tied to the ground. Well, it is for there, but he's going to let it go. All right. Airship. What then is a blimp? Oh, they don't call them blimps. They call them aerostats. Well, a blimp, if you look it up in the dictionary, how am I doing on time? Am I doing all right? Okay. What's that? Oh, I've got a captive audience. You poor people. It's not my fault. Okay. If you look it up in the dictionary, Oxford Dictionary, Encyclopedia Britannica, or whatever they'll say, blimp comes from the old British terminology that they used to use in the First World War, where you have a type A airship, which was a rigid airship, and a type B airship, which was a non-rigid or limp airship. I'm sorry about this terminology, but that's simply what it is, okay? And so they put the term blimp for type B limp bag together, and they came up with blimp. There's no truth in this. This is a rumor, okay? We're going to give you there was no B-class airship. It's just simply not true. So there was no B-type class airship, but there was the lieutenant, later Air Commodore A.D. Cunningham of the Royal Naval Airship. He was real. That's not really him. I couldn't find a picture of Cunningham, but if this guy doesn't look like an Air Commodore, I don't know who does. I don't know. Anyways, he had a blimp squadron under his command, and he was going down there to make an inspection. So he's up there and he's looking at the blimp. And this is more likely the real origin of the word blimp. He goes up there and he thumps the balloon, the bag, the envelope, the hull, whatever you want to call it, and it makes a sound. And he goes, blimp, blimp. All right. And he makes sense. Like, yes, we'll start calling them blimps. And all right. So the word is onomatopoeic in origin. Is onomatopoeic a word? If it isn't, it's not my fault. So, all right, if that's the case, then we'll call it a blimp. So now we'll go back to the same question. Is it an aerostat or a blimp? Is it an airship or is it a blimp? Any suggestions? What's that? Well, no, we're talking about blimp now, because people will see an aerostat flying over the base and say it's a blimp. And remember, from as far as our Commander Cunningham was concerned, he says if you hit it and it makes the sound blimp, it's a blimp. All right. I think I might be losing you. If I am, I apologize. That is my fault. But if you get the name by thumping it and it sounds like blimp, they're both blimps. Why? I know this for a fact because I've thumped them both. All right. Doesn't matter whether it has motors on it or not. It's going to go blimp. If it doesn't have it, if it has motors, it's going to go blimp. So as far as I'm concerned, if you see an aerostat flying over the base and you want to call it a blimp, you're perfectly within your rights to do so because it's correct using that definition. I wouldn't say it made, blimp. It sounds like a thud, but you're not going to say, "Oh, look, here comes the Goodyear thud." So are we okay with this? All right, let's move on. Airships have been gone since 1957, but all of a sudden, my goodness, they're going to come back. Where in the world did they come from? Well, let's find out. Back in the 1970s, there was an energy crisis. Perhaps you remember the long gas lines. And at that time, some of the agencies and the government were looking for more economical ways to, do surveillance, especially aerial surveillance. Oh, don't want to send a battleship out to look for some drug smugglers. Let's find something cheaper. So there's a couple of paper exercises that are done by the Navy, by the Coast Guard, by NASA. Yeah, we're going to take one of those balloons and put some engines on it and fly it out. We're going to save a lot of money. Nothing was built. Nothing was really spent other than investing in these studies, but it gave some people ideas. About this time, there was a company in England, coincidentally or whatever. It's called Airship Industries. Airship Industries. There's going to be 3 companies where I use the term airship, but I will identify this as either airships, Airship Industries, AI, but it's Airship Industries. This is a company that brought blimps back to Elizabeth City. It was headed up by that guy in the middle. His name is Roger Monk. He was a chief designer. And he said, oh, well, we're going to build this real cool blimp with all kinds of composite materials on it, plastic bag, propellers that swivel up and down, low radar signature. This is the bee's knees. And sure enough, he gets together enough investors and they put one of these things together, full scale, manned model, fly it over in Cardington, England, back on February the 3rd, 1979. And it's a reasonable success. So what happens? Well, now you get the marketing people out there with their pens and pencils and drawing up with all these artists' impressions, and they come up with this great new platform that's going to do everything. It's going to do border patrol. It's going to do pollution monitoring. You're going to find drug smugglers with that search and rescue. Oh my gosh, there's a fire over there in the horizon. Call in the cavalry. Everything will be able to be done with this airship. Okay? to add fuel to the flames of enthusiasm. Did I get it across all right?
the rest of it if you
In
want.
1982, there's a war in the Falklands, during which time the Argentinians deploy a cruise missile that skims along the surface, can't be seen by radar because it's too low and it's too fast, and it slams into the side of the British battleship or frigate HMS Sheffield and sinks it. This is a big deal. This scares a lot of people beyond England. It changes the face of naval warfare. There's this guy you see on the left. He is the Secretary of Navy in the United States. His name is John F. Lehman Jr. Mary is talking to a friend of his over there on the right, and he says, we can't put up with this type of new technology sinking our ships. So what does he do? He said, well, yeah, those guys over in England, they've got this great new blimp that can do everything. He says, what we'll do is we'll make a real big one. We'll put a real big radar on it, and we'll go out there and we'll find these low flying exosets and we'll pick them up and we'll send adequate warning. We'll command the skies again. So he comes up with this concept for a battle surveillance airship system, BSAS, the battle airship, the battle blimp, you'll hear me refer to it as. British get wind of this and say, yeah, this is right up our alley. Let's get one of our airships over there, which is what they do. They don't fly it. They bring it over on a boat or something like that. They assemble it up in Canada, and Airship Industries, the British group, Airship Industries, remember this is the first airship company, get up with Westinghouse, and they come up with a deal. Westinghouse says, this is great. You guys build the blimp. We'll build the radar system. We have manufacturing company down here called TCOM. They can build a bag. We're going to have a marriage grouping, whatever, made in heaven. We're going to get this battle blimp contract, and we're going to make lots and lots of money. Okay. Thank you, Ron. That's Ron's picture. There we go. So what happens? Airship Industries flies their airship down from Canada. They landed here at Weeksville, and on the 10th of August, 1983, blimps are back. To take it even a step further, interestingly enough, the Westinghouse Airship Industries consortium actually wins the Navy contract for the big battle blimp in 1987. But it's going to take a while before those big Navy bucks start rolling in, so they've got to do something with the blimps that they have here in Elizabeth City, that being Airship Industries. We've got to make some money with them. So they have a guy up here on the right. His name is George Spiro. Remember that name. He will appear again. He's an attorney, and he's attorney for the Airship Industries, and he's selling, he's in the marketing department. He signs a contract with Mr. Susumu-san of the Fuji Corporation. Now you see the Fuji blimp, and that's built here in Elizabeth City. So now we have commercial operations. Also at this time, the Airship Industries is bought by this chap named Alan Bond from Australia. Australian businessman noted for its high profile and often corrupt business dealings. More on corrupted business dealings in a moment. He buys the company. Now, down in South Florida at the time, there's a large bank, and they have a commercial lending officer who handles all of the aviation accounts. And as a result of that, they give her a subscription to Aviation Week in Space Technology. She dutifully is perusing the magazine one night, and she comes across this advertisement. It says, lighter than air personnel for a challenging airship flight program. Oh, commercial pilot's licenses. Anyways, to end this real quickly, a lot of people will come up to me and say, Scott, how do you become a blimp pilot? And I say, it's easy. I said, just get your wife to peruse the pages of Aviation Week and Space Technology. If it weren't for that, none of us would be sitting here right now. What is this exciting airship program? Well, there's this company up in Atlantic City, New Jersey, who wants to buy a commercial version of this battle airship, put some nice windy stairs and some cocktail bars on it, and they're going to fly this thing with a load of passengers from the East River in New York, or the Hudson River in New York, and they're going to plop them down in front of the Resorts International Casino, and they're going to make lots and lots of money. So All right, let's go. What do? I pack up the car. I move to Bob's Motor Court, northern end of town. That's where I take up accommodations. I was on the unit to the right as you're facing it. And so we get into airships. So I go, we call it blimp camp. So I go and I learn how to take off and land. We do round and round and learn how to fly the blimp. At this same time, Resorts is building their airship in the hangar here at Elizabeth City. We fly it out. We take it up to New Jersey and we fly around up there and do some advertising. And then in July of 1986, we're invited to the Great Blimp Race up in New York as part of the 100th anniversary celebration of the Statue of Liberty. So we cruise around New Jersey and the tri-state area, and they're going to have a blimp race at the end from the George Washington Bridge down to the Statue of Liberty. So we line up and off we go. And there's my lovely wife, Lisa, on the party boat that marks the finish line with our very good friend, Norman Mayer. He's passed away. He was actually the technical and engineering mind behind the Resorts International operation. He didn't work for Resorts. He was a contractor. So they're down here at the finish line and we come hauling down the Hudson River. Everybody's, come on, come on, come on. And first one across the line was the Fuji blimp. Oh, by the way, keep your mind on that little sign to the left there, the Great Blimp Race, because Norman was fortunate enough they gave him that when he left the when the race was over. So anyways, Fuji comes, they're the first one across the finish line. We come in a very close second, about 25 to 30 minutes later, and there's a big parade after that. We all get together. Hey, yeah, these are all Airship Industries airship, big time. We're having a great time indeed. And so we all go home. But my wife, true to form, remember that little sign that they gave to Norman? Well, my wife's not going to be outdone by that, is she? No, no, no. She grabs this off of the smokestack of the cruise ship. And it's upside down. It's upside down. She pulls this off the smokestack and she goes down the steps and she's walking through downtown Manhattan, onto a subway train. A true superhero. I love it. My life. So anyways, let's move along. We fly back to Atlantic City and they terminate the Resorts contract. The Resorts contract, okay? The guy who was the brains behind this whole thing, he passed away. He was in charge of the company. All of his underlings said, well, we'll get rid of this airship. We don't want this. And so what we do, we pack up, we fly back down to Elizabeth City, and I become an employee of Airship Industries, the British company, okay? So what happens after that? Well, at least we'll move to Elizabeth City. We'll get an apartment at Elizabeth City Gardens down there on Hughes Boulevard on the Weeksville Road. Naive, silly mortals. They said, you're not going anywhere. These are British airships. You've got to get your British writtens taken care of. Yeah, you've done all of the flight training, but I've got to get a British license. This thing, okay? And the only way I can get this British license is to go to England and take the written examinations. So first thing we know, we're on our way to jolly old England. We move on to a farm in Bedfordshire. Lisa becomes a hunter-gatherer. I go to school, get my purple book, and, oh, well, that's done. Well, we can go back to Elizabeth City now, can't we? Well, you think. There's Elizabeth City, they've got airships. They've got airships in England. They've got airships in San Francisco. They've got airships in Australia, got an airship in Japan. They've got Fuji zooming back and forth across the countryside. Where are we going to end up? Well, we end up in San Francisco pretty quick, right off the bat. And while we're in San Francisco, our daughter Shelby is born. on the crew. And so we say, hey, what a great opportunity. Shelby's only like 2 days old. We can take her up and make her the youngest person ever to fly in the airship. We'll get in the Guinness World Record. Well, we did. Here she is. She's about 3.5 days old, somewhere between, 80 and 82 hours old. So we fly her over the Golden Gate Bridge. A couple of weeks later, Shelby's out on Fuji. A couple of weeks after that, we're back on the farm in England. Do you see a trend? Couple weeks after that, Shelby's in Japan. Couple weeks after that, Shelby is in Canada, Toronto, Canada. A couple of weeks after that, Shelby's in Germany, making the newspaper. After 40,000 miles in the air, the little Shelby lands unexpectedly in Hanover. Couple weeks after that, Shelby becomes the youngest person to cross the English Channel in an airship. Couple of weeks after that, we're back on the farm. Shelby's getting christened in the Anglican church. Take a break for a while. Go back to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where our parents lived to spend Christmas. Take a break. Ease up. Because next year, at the end of right after the beginning of the new year, we're going to Japan. Okay, so we get Shelby all ready for that trip. But before we leave, I get a call from the company saying, listen, we've got a lot of people out there we need to train. We've got a training operation going on, and where of all places? Elizabeth City, North Carolina. And they say, what will it be for you? Japan or a steady 9-to-5 job in Elizabeth City? I said, I think I'll take Elizabeth City. Thank you very much. So we start doing training. We've got FAA certification for the airships. We've got a lot of pilots coming through. So we go up and start flying around in circles over Elizabeth City, doing training, taking off to the ground crew, back and forth, same thing over every day. We buy ourselves a nice little house on Church Street, and Fuji comes back. They've got 2 airships now. Everything is just great. Westinghouse Airships is doing their work for the Navy on the big BSAS battle airship. There's another airship that's being built here. You can see eclipsing everything. That's going to end up as the MetLife Blimp. We don't operate this. We're selling it to someone else down in Florida who's going to operate. And this guy is named Lou Pearlman. Remember this name. He will appear again here in a few moments. He's buying the blimps. All right, we'll take the blimp down, sell it to Louis. Everything is great. Also about this time, the French call us up. Oh, we were having the 200th anniversary of the bicentennial for the Bastille Day, all kinds of stuff going on. Bring your airship over to Paris, which we do. And that's my photograph. I took that picture. Why? Because I worked the night shift. We'd take off at 10 o'clock in the evening. We'd fly through the night, 2 hours on, 2 hours off. And when you're off, you either try to get some sleep, or I go over and I look over the shoulder of the guys on the camera, and they would say, oh, yes, here are some fancy ladies, and they bois de ballon. You can tell because they have such a high infrared signature. Would you like a glass of wine? And I said, no, thank you. I'm driving. Shelby in Paris. Come back to Elizabeth City, do some training again. And then the Brits say, hey, you guys want to go to the UK for the summer? We're going to be doing some passenger rides over there. We say, sure. So Shelby and Lisa and I, we pack up. We move back onto the farm. We do passenger rides over the base in England at Cardington. And then finally they say, oh, we're going to make another record here. We're going to do a 50-hour endurance ride. So a bunch of us, couple of us, 4 of the pilots, myself included, we get onto the airship. They fill us up with helium. They load us up with gasoline, and we head down to the South Coast. We're flying around the Isle of Man, making, having a great old time. We're sleeping on the airship, and about 35, 40 hours a day, day and a half into the flight, we get some news, and they're saying, hey, things are not all that great here on the ground, and some noise being spread around about 50 million pound debt for the company. But we say, oh, no, that can't be. We've got a $170 million contract with the United States Navy. And they say, well, we did have a $170 million contract with the United States Navy, but your research and development people have been, to use the word, gobbling funds, and there's nothing left. It's gone. We land the airship after 50 some odd hours. I'm met by this group of people who have these kind of like sad smiles on their face. And they pour out these tiny little glasses of champagne with about that much in the bottom. Why? Because there's no money to buy a second bottle of champagne. Seriously. So Airship Industries, the first company, put an X through it. It's kind of like leaves Westinghouse in a bit of a bind. You're doing okay? Okay. In a bit of a bind because they've still got that Navy contract, remember? And they've still bound by the terms of that contract. So what do? They buy Airship Industries, lock, stock, and barrel, everything, the whole 9 yards. And they split it into 2 entities, the research and development team, who spends all that money, and the commercial airship operations, which is the Fuji blimp. They don't want this commercial side, so they sell it off. Who do they sell it to? They sell it to this guy, Louis Pearlman. And that would be great. The only problem is Louis Pearlman is a criminal. You look him up on the YouTube, it says right there, Louis J. Pearlman, scam artist. This is his introduction on Wikipedia. So, well, Louis, he does some stuff. He's got his MetLife blimp. We know that. He's in Orlando, so he arranges a deal with Anheuser-Busch, gets the Shamu contract, gets a Budweiser contract, and he also gets this, Pink Floyd blimp. I'm not sure where he got it, but Pink Floyd had the Division Bell tour. And they made this remarkable airship into a remarkable work of art by some guy right here in town. Does anybody remember his name? Anybody here? I don't know. It was a local guy. He painted this thing, and it's really become quite famous. So Pink Floyd goes out there flying around. The Golf blimp is another one that Louis has, but that's from a German manufacturer, falls outside the scope of this presentation. So what happens? Well, remember, Louis Pearlman is a criminal. And criminals a lot of times don't pay their bills. And so there's a lot of unpaid bills here in Elizabeth City, for vehicle maintenance and stuff like that. He comes back with the Shamu airship, Airship International, Louis Pearlman, brings the Shamu airship back in. The Pasquotank County Sheriff's Department gets wind of it. A lot of the people that are owed money by Louis call up the police, the Sheriff's Department. You need to do something about it. So what you're seeing here is a picture of a Pasquotank County Sheriff's deputy taking possession or impounding the Shamu SeaWorld airship. That's exactly what's going on in this picture. Well, Budweiser's not, or Anheuser-Busch isn't too happy about the fact that, well, they can't get their airship out of the hangar because it's being impounded by the local police. So they go to another supplier called the Lightship Group. They make much smaller airships, much less expensive, easier to operate. So Budweiser, Anheuser-Busch pull their contract from Airship International, Louis Pearlman. MetLife does the same thing. Might have got one of those big expensive British blimps with the Go Fast stripes on it. We can give you 2 for the price of 1. They lose the MetLife contract. What happens to this guy? He finishes his contract. He comes back to Elizabeth City. They will not let him back in the hangar. Why? Because Louis doesn't pay his bills. Why doesn't Louis pay his bills? Because Louis Pearlman is a criminal. So the airship is out there on the mast, and a storm comes blowing through one day, and we're up there watching it, and the airship is going boom, 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 boom. And I was up there with John Hankins. He says, it's going to make it, isn't it? And I says, no, it doesn't look very good. Ron Hochstetler shows up at about the same time with a guy and a camera, and they're trying to set up the camera to get photographs of this thing. But before they get it set up, it blows apart on the mast. And there's parts of airship all over the ground. And we said, hey, somebody one of these days is going to pick up that fabric and cut it up and sell it on eBay. This is an eBay advertisement I got just last week. $725. You can get yourself a piece of history. After bumping the stock prices up on Airship International, Louis Pearlman had it up $6 a share. They eventually sold out for $3 or 3 cents a share. Their airships were gone, so he decides he's going to shut the company down.
Right
And
now,
he
this is
says,
very
oh,
important.
I got to do something different now. So we've already done blimps. What are we going to do now? He says, well, I think I'll do boy bands and Ponzi schemes. Louis Pearlman goes on the lam around 2005. He flees the country. They pick him up in Mali or Bali or someplace like that. What was it? Interpol? They drag him back to Orange County, Florida, where he's convicted on several different financial charges, leaves his investors $300 million in debt, is sentenced to 25 years in prison, and he dies while incarcerated. See you, Louis. He's gone. So what happens to the Westing? We're getting kind of close to the end. So, okay, what happens to Westinghouse? We've already gone through the Navy. We've already gone through Airship Industries. We've already gone through Airship International. What about Westinghouse? Well, they still have the research and development team for the big battle blimp, right? All right. They start building a mock-up, full-scale mock-up for this battle blimp. They start assembling it here at the hangar in Elizabeth City. They finish it off. This thing is really cool. Doesn't do anything. It looks real good. One scale, one-to-one scale model of the new YEZ-2A, which is the official designation. Sounds a little better than battle blimp, I guess. So this is what the final product is supposed to be looking like. It's far too big to build, so we have to build a smaller version of it. So they come up with a 1/10 scale model of it, which is a very large airship called the Operational Development Model. It takes to flight on June 26, 1991, here in Elizabeth City, soon to be known as the Sentinel 1000. And with this, we test the systems that are going to be used for the big battle airship. And pneumatic system for the air system, fly-by-light system, and all kinds of new stuff that we have to test for the new ship. And we do it with a smaller version. What do? We do test flying, developmental test flying. We have to write up normal procedures for the new airship, emergency procedures for the new airship, and we just basically have to figure this out while we're going along. Oh, port engine is just caught on fire. Well, what do we do? I don't know. Well, we have to figure this stuff out. We put everything together, all the engineering data, engineering drawings. We come up with a flight manual. We turn the flight manual and all the documentation over to the Federal Aviation Administration. Federal Aviation Administration says, yeah, it looks pretty good. We're going to give you a registration of airworthiness and for your airship. That's good. You guys have done a really good job. You're certified now. So what do? We immediately tear everything out and we start doing more trials for the Navy. This is the only picture that I'm aware of the Sentinel 1000 interior during the certification phase. Bill, do you see what hat I'm wearing? Do you see what I've got in my mouth? Of course. No, I'm not smoking that cigar. But that's me on the left. We're up here doing work for the Navy. And what are we doing? Oh, also in the back, you can see there's a winch back there. We made a lot of use on that. What do? So we do tethering at sea. We try to moor the airship with a sea anchor out to sea. We do underway replenishment, hauling fuel up into the airship. We have this thing called a bow thruster. This is a jet engine mounted on the nose of the airship. And I'm sorry, it scared the heck out of us because if everything just wasn't right, the RPMs, the temperatures, as soon as you threw the fuel on to ignite this thing to get it started, it would burst out in flames. But we worked out the procedures to the point where, fortunately, no one was injured. The results of the trials were somewhat inconclusive. And then all of the trials ended. In 1995, there was something called the peace dividend. This was something that came out in the United States government as a result of the wall coming down 5 years earlier in Berlin. The Soviet Union was ended. So a lot of the military funding for these special projects was redirected into more social programs, infrastructure, and so forth. So the money was beginning to dry up. So we flew around for a while, wondering where the next paycheck was going to come from. And then on August 4th, the night watchman at TCOM gets a call from outside and says, "Hey, I think your building's on fire." And the guy said, "Apparently, no, I don't think so. I think it's just the welders down there." He said, "Well, you better take a closer look." Hey, John. Hey, Sandy. Hey, Kay. And so you better take a closer look. Are these your pictures, Steve? Okay. And so they said, "Well, it looks like we might be able to keep it a little bit limited. And so maybe it's too bad for the Westinghouse guys, but we should be all right on TCOM." These pictures were taken by Steve Chalker here in the front row, by the way. But you know, things aren't looking really all that good. And a little bit before midnight, it's starting to look a little bit dodgy. After midnight, it was all over for the shouting. Whoops. Strong winds that night. Hangar was ablaze end to end at about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. The next morning, this is what we woke up to. It was all gone. This is all that was left of the Sentinel 1000, the ODM. That's the port outrigger, engine outrigger there. This is the bow thruster, finally in its own element. It's, you know, so there we have it for Westinghouse. What happens with Westinghouse? They go the same way as Airship Industries, Airship International. They're gone. What about the Navy contract? It's gone. What about the Research and Development Organization in England? Well, they exit stage right. It's kind of like the last scene in the New Hope movie, Star Wars, when Darth Vader gets knocked off screen, but you know he's not quite gone. Same thing here, but for the purposes of this presentation, we'll just write them off. Where's Fuji been throughout this whole operation? You'd think it's all over, but lo and behold, back in the days when they were selling the operation, the commercial airship operations, to Louis Pearlman, you would think, oh, Pearlman had Fuji. No, he didn't. Why didn't he have Fuji? Because of this guy, George Spiro, the guy who first signed the contract with Fuji back in 1983. He's the attorney. He knows what's going on. He's a marketing guy. And he calls up Fuji and said, "We got to do something. Louis Pearlman is going to come and take over the company." And so literally, as the ink is drying on the paperwork between Westinghouse and Louis Pearlman, the criminal, George throws together this group of investors from a large Japanese shipping company, Nisho Owai, Fujifilm, and a couple of guys from TCOM, and they set up this company called Airship Management Service, the last of the airship companies, okay? Let's go through this. What happens next? They set up Airship Management Services specifically to service the Fuji blimp, which they do. And also shortly after that, the hangar at Weeksville, the steel hangar, comes up for sale. TCOM buys it. Up to this time, they've been putting balloons together or aerostats together in the former, was it Kmart, which is where Lowe's is now located. Now they can move everything back to the base. And so, all right, we've got the base back. And so what do? They call up Mr. Dewey across the river in Camden. "Hey, you know how to work these doors?" "Yeah, I remember how to do that." So he comes over with his oil can and his hammer and his pry bar, and he opens up those doors. And the first airship in is Fuji. Airship Management Services under George Spiro opens up an operations and maintenance facility next to the existing hangar. This is where they do their engines, their gondolas, and everything. And they have all of this space available in the hangar to work on their airships. They can do their inflations in there. Well, we've got to earn some money sometime between contracts. So what do? We do blimp rides over Elizabeth City. Anybody remember that? Yay. Okay, great. We have those spare airships and we fly people over downtown. Anybody know this building? That's the Holiday Inn, the current Econo Lodge, right there in the corner of Ehringhaus and Halstead Boulevard. Anybody recognize this? That's downtown. You can see the Camden Causeway a little bit to the left of center. There's the water tower. Does anybody recognize this place? This is Pelican Point. Very good. Who is that? Hey, well done, Peter. You got it. That's Pelican Point. We got a couple more contracts outside of Fuji. We get AmeriQuest 1. We get AmeriQuest 2. We're getting real close to the end now, by the way. We've got an airship that we fly over Trinidad for surveillance purposes. But you know, times are changing. There's new technologies out there. There's new drone technology, both long range and short range. And they're taking over a lot of the roles of the airships. Remember airships flying over football games, such an iconic sight? Well, you're not seeing as much of that anymore. Why? Because they've got gyro stabilized camera systems that you can put on a helicopter, much cheaper for much less of a cost. You also have these sky cams, they call them, that you follow the football players around inside the stadiums. You can see their nasal hairs. They're very, very high resolution. All right. Also, most of the stadiums are indoors now. And so big airship, manned airship flying around outside is not going to do you that much good. But the idea of an airship over a football game doesn't die. Now you've got these people who are building these things for indoors. Question, is this an airship or an aerostat? No, it's an airship because it's got motors, okay? It's not manned, but it certainly is cowed. Ha ha, I made a pun. All right, as far as other surveillance work outside, close in, high resolution pictures of areas of areas on the ground. Does anybody recognize this? We're sitting there right now. This is the Museum of the Albemarle. This was not taken from a blimp. It was taken from this. So you see that the blimp, the reasons behind blimps starting to diminish a little bit. In 2008, after 25 years, the Fuji blimp contract was canceled. We tried to hold things together for a little while after that with some one-off kind of like short-term contracts, but it wasn't to be. The airship started to deteriorate a little bit and things started, waning quite a bit. George Spiro, the one who kept all of this going, passes away on February the 27th, 2010. About 6 months after that, this happens. I was out in Utah with TCOM when this happened. That's the last airship management services airship pulled off the mast here at Weeksville and collided into the TCOM 74-meter aerostat. That essentially was the end for airships in Elizabeth City. You'll still get the occasional one in and out, but for all intents and purposes, they are gone. Airship industries goes the way of everybody else. It is important to note, in closing here, that Airship Management Services operated airships here for 5 years longer than the United States Navy. That's not an insignificant achievement. Thank you, George. Epilogue. Don't you love epilogues? Because you're right towards the end. Whoops. All of the Airship Management Services assets were bought up.
Are you okay?
They were able to gather up all of these pieces and throw this one last Skyship 600 together.
What's wrong with you?
That was appropriately named the Spirit of George after George Spiro. What did they use it for? Whoops, wrong way. What did they use it for? BBC was doing a documentary on the actual secrets structure of the atmosphere itself, and what better vehicle to use than an airship. Very, very appropriate. And I remember the last time I saw one of these, I was at Handy Hugo over there on the corner of Halstead Boulevard and what is it, Roanoke there? And I could hear this sound. There was a real distinctive sound of these airships. The gearbox is whining, the engine, and I looked up, and sure enough, there it was, just hovering over top of me. And I said to myself, I wonder if I'll ever see one of those again. Anyways, I'll open things up to questions. Thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Well, there's nothing there anymore. So what did they,
We have time?
sports club, when we first moved in here, they had a trip out
Okay.
there.
When was the last time?
Last time I flew was in summer of 2009. It's been a while. It's been a long time. The most fun?
Yeah,
Probably
Yeah,
finding
gave
out that
us-
my wife was able to drag that big sign all the way.
Sure, he gave a pretty good history of the local.
That's one of those questions. That's really, there's so many
airship
things. Yeah, go ahead.
company.
What's?
It all started,
We are recording this.
during the,
And we will have it published in probably about a week. And it will be available on the.
the Navy got involved during the gas crisis.
Everybody content? Thank
Energy
you very
crunch
much for
in the
spending.
'70s.
Oh, another question here?
Figured
Yeah,
this
sorry.
might be a cheaper way.
What's
to
that?
buy out things.
Oh,
And
Shelby,
eventually,
she's
you know, we have
35,
satellites,
36. She's living
we have
in Raleigh
drones.
now.
Need these things anyway.
No, no, I had three children with three different
Okay.
companies. Shelby was Airship Industries out in San Francisco. Thane, my middle son, was born here in Elizabeth City with Westinghouse, and my youngest, Colson, was born over in Germany when I was working for the Zeppelin company. So yeah, each one of my children has one of their own airship. The same. She would know better than me, Margine. Anything else? Yeah.
What was your proudest moment? 40 years of airships.
My proudest moment in all of these 40 years of airships and aerostats. It's not my fault. Well, I hate to say it, but probably my proudest moment was when we were in Germany and the Zeppelin company had gotten airships back in the air again, you know, about 60 years after that disaster up in Lakers, so we won't mention that by name. And so I had the opportunity to make the first flight on that new Zeppelin airship. That's probably my proudest moment. But boy, we had some fun here. There's no question about that. Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
And we invite you to come back on April the 3rd for the Frank Six Black Hawk. Thank you. Also, you really need to buy it.
I really need to. It's 12, it's 1 o'clock. Perfect. It worked out just fine.
Here, hold on.
Did I do all right, Steve?